Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to an episode of Double Take. Today I'm going to talk about Oscar bait, or two films that aren't Oscar bait, even though they are in the realm of Oscar bait. So we're going to talk about 1980's Resurrection with Ellen Burstyn, directed by Daniel Petrie, and 2002's Black and White, directed by Craig Lahiff from Australia. Now, obviously we know kind of what Oscar bait films are, and these two fall within the auspices, the purview of Oscar bait films. So you can have films based on true stories. This one is another one about racial injustice in Australia. Australians are fed up with their country being portrayed as being really racist and homophobic and misogynistic, because that just seems what all the films are about. And then you have films about somebody overcoming some terrible accident. In 1980, I don't think there was such a thing as Oscar bait films, or they weren't perceived that way, whereas certainly in the last 20 years Hollywood and Hollywood actors and filmmakers have become more cynical, obviously, and they know that if they touch certain topics, there's a good chance they're going to be nominated for Oscars. And obviously Hollywood actors have ego issues, 99.9% of them, and to win an Oscar increases your revenue and how much money you can demand, because obviously millionaires can never have as much money. But certainly in 1980, I don't think it was as cynical as that. So nowadays you'll see people playing black, trans, alcoholic, autistic characters who wake up one morning with dwarfism, because they know they're in for a chance of an Oscar. But again, we'll start with 1980's Resurrection, which again has the trappings of Oscar bait, and certainly if I was in a more cynical mood I might not have enjoyed it as much, but I was actually, it's quite moving in places. But then that's probably down to the cast. So Ellen Burstyn is obviously bursting with talent, but you get Sam Shepard looking every bit like the American poet voice of the Midwest. You've got Richard Farnsworth, who shares his one scene with Ellen Burstyn, and it will bring you to tears, just the sheer humanity between the two actors and characters. I mean, Richard Farnsworth just glows with humanity. I mean, his character in this is a little bit Alvin Strait. You've got Roberts Blossom, who certainly I love from Deranged, where he's playing a thinly veiled Ed Gein. He plays Ellen Burstyn's dad. Lois Smith and Eva Le Gallienne has a wonderful performance as Ellen Burstyn's grandmother. And Jeffrey DeMunn, good old Jeffrey DeMunn, with hair, which might put people off with dark hair. He plays Ellen Burstyn's husband. And they're happily married, but Ellen Burstyn gets him a racy little sporting car for his birthday, and they immediately go for a drive. No seatbelts, obviously, 1980. Certainly John Wayne never wore a seatbelt. And then they're going for a drive, everything's wonderful, but as you can probably tell, something bad's going to happen. And a small child comes out on a skateboard, they go off a cliff, a badly placed cliff right next to the road. Jeffrey DeMunn is killed, and Ellen Burstyn is put into a wheelchair, basically. So already you can tell, I can smell Oscar bait. I actually thought the film would be a revenge film, as Ellen Burstyn tracks down the wee bugger on the skateboard that caused her life to be ruined, but strangely enough, the kid is never seen again in the film. There's absolutely no consequences for flying into the road on a skateboard. I mean, the child should have been crucified, but I suppose probably not allowed to see child crucifixion in films in 1980. So she goes back to her family home in the middle of nowhere from California, to Robert Blossom's, who's bears a grudge against her for something that happened when she was younger, which I'm not going to tell you. And slowly she tries to rehab. She meets people. She's a relative she's never met for years. And on the way, they come across Richard Farnsworth, who has this last chance gas station. And again, that scene is just, if you don't watch the rest of the film, just watch the scene between Burstyn and Farnsworth. The humanity between them is just absolutely beautiful. He shows her his two-headed snake. It's not that kind of film. And he kind of cheers her up spiritually. But anyway, at the family affair, a wee girl who's a terrible bleeder starts getting a nosebleed, and of course everybody panics, and the kind of family doctor's there as well. And Ellen Burstyn just kind of says, well, give her to me for a second and I'll try and calm her down. And she lays hands on the wee girl and stops the nosebleed, and everybody's like freaked out by this because our nosebleeds generally take a while to stop. And thus starts this idea that Ellen Burstyn can actually heal people. But unlike the usual healer film, she's not doing it in the name of God. She's just doing it through love. She starts being a bit of a local sensation. She gets herself to walk just by touching herself on her legs. But of course, being the Midwest and the Bible Belt, some people are a little bit annoyed that she's not mentioning it's the power of Jesus, which means if she doesn't mention it's the power of Jesus, it must be the power of the devil, obviously, because that's how logic works. And she's defiantly not saying it's God, which makes a change, quite frankly. Sam Shepard is a guy that she stops him bleeding in the back of a truck after a bar fight, and he's stabbed. They become involved, but as she gets kind of more and more successful, his father's a Bible thumper and he's against that, but then he slowly gets the idea that she's actually Jesus come back. So he becomes stranger and weirder and more extreme because he wants her to admit she's Jesus come back, which obviously she's not prepared to do. She ends up going for tests at UCLA because there's a group of scientists that are fascinated by healers and proving that they're not healers. it's just a wonderful film that, again, I'm surprised it hasn't been remade as Oscar bait, but maybe it was just the mood I was in. But I didn't find it cynical. You know, the score isn't that kind of patronising, you will feel this emotion now. There's not actually that much of a score at all. Maybe in a couple of bits. But it's actually a relatively intelligent film, because again, it just doesn't go for the, oh, this must be the work of the Lord angle that so many films about healers do. Yeah, Burston is just fantastic. Everybody's wonderful in the film. So this is the imprint. Blu-ray. It's just a wonderful, wonderful little film. But again, if you're in a really cynical mood, you might not like it, but I'm usually in a cynical mood, but I really went with it, and it's because of Burston, really. And obviously Shepherd and Farnsworth, just beautiful in the film. It's a 2K scan. There's a commentary by Lee Gambon from 2023. There's a wonderful interview with Ellen Burstyn from 2023. She is a spiritual person, and she tells us about her accident her son had. She said that she met a certain healer who was studied at UCLA, so that's why UCLA and the scientists kind of feature in the film. Originally the script was going to be Jesus comes back as a woman, but Burstyn really didn't like it, and she kind of came up with the idea of the general story. Obviously she'd done The Exorcist, so she had a bit of star power. Yeah, so that interview is absolutely wonderful. Absolutely beautiful interview. And then there's a video essay by Kat Ellinger from 2023, Born to be Wild, Resurrection and the Rise of the Divine Feminine. So again, this is an example of a film, if it was made now, it would be completely Oscar bait. But because of, well, let's be honest, the actors of today just don't have the talent of Ellen Burstyn and Richard Farnsworth and Sam Shepard and, well, Jeffrey DeMunn's still about. Yeah, just a beautiful, beautiful little film, which again has Oscar bait written all over it, but in 1980 I don't think there was the same cynical, let's make this film because I'll win an Oscar. I mean, maybe I could be wrong, but it was less evident, shall we say. And then we come to Black and White from 2002. It's obviously an Australian film, so I guess it would only win a foreign film Oscar, but you get the idea. True stories that are about injustice, especially racial injustice. You could see Hollywood actors flocking to that, to be in it, for the chance to win an Oscar and improve their career and improve their wallet. This stars Robert Carlyle, Charles Dance, who, let's be honest, Charles Dance walks away with the film, but Kerry Fox, Ben Mendelsohn, and David Ngumbajara. No surprise he plays the Aborigine. So this was based on a true story from 1958 about the murder or rape and murder of a 9-year-old white girl, and it was quickly pinned on a drifter, an Aborigine who was working with a travelling circus or a fair, carnival. Robert Carlyle and Kerry Fox defended him. Well, no, they play the characters who defended him. Yeah, they didn't defend him in 1958. But he was sentenced to death. And this is the film about the several appeals. Australians are really good at getting period films to feel like period films. So as I said, Carlyle and Fox, these characters who were real people, strangely enough, they are poor lawyers. They don't have much power. It's in this little town in southern Australia, and he was tried in Adelaide, which is obviously not a small town, against the government led by Charles Dance as the prosecutor, who's looking to get a promotion out of it, and obviously there's lots of politics involved. It has slight Rashomon influences in the fact that different people we see in kind of flashback what could have happened, or their stories playing out with the characters. The confession, allegedly in his own words, even though English was his second language. And after he was sentenced, there was a Aboriginal language expert who pretty much said there's no way he could have written or orated the confession using kind of phrases and grammar that he just wouldn't have been able to use. But by that time he'd already been sentenced to death, and the appeals don't bring in new evidence. The confession was taken with 6 police officers with no representation, obviously. It was basically, we need to pin this on somebody. But in the small town where Fox and Carlyle practiced, it's a police town, so to go against the police wasn't very popular, and they lost lots of business. And it just goes through each appeal and each failure. So I think he was set to hang about 7 times. Obviously you'll have to watch the film to see how it ends up. People have called it dull and boring, but I don't really get that, because of the performances, especially by Charles Dance, who just exudes establishment. So even though his character is a bit of an arse, because it's Charles Dance, he's still somehow likeable. Now the shocking thing about the film is Ben Mendelsohn's character, because he plays somebody you might have heard of called Rupert Murdoch. Yep, Rupert Murdoch. He started when his father died, and he took over the Adelaide News at the age of 21. So in this, Rupert Murdoch is using fairly ridiculous sensational headlines to back Carlyle and Fox's character's case against the government. So the idea of Rupert Murdoch being a social justice warrior is a bit strange, but allegedly that happened. So Ben Mendelsohn plays Rupert Murdoch, which was a bizarre twist. There's some modern little things thrown in that you would only know, looking retrospectively. So there's no way people would say the stuff that they say in 1958. So there's just a couple of kind of little nods to the future that obviously they wouldn't know about in 1958. So that's a little bit cheeky, just to get people who watch it in 2002 to go, you will be annoyed at the characters who play the establishment. So there's kind of one appeal that they put forward to like the Privy Council, which is made up of the cream of the crop of lawyers, and of course they get two actors who are just so annoyingly establishment that you just want to slap them, but they do a really good job of being annoying establishment characters. So they kind of criticise Carlisle's character for not doing his job properly. You know, at the original trial he should have asked for a translator, because one of the points was the accused was illiterate, he couldn't read or write, but he had written a statement with Carlisle and Fox characters to read out in the court, but the judge wouldn't let somebody else read it out for him, even though he couldn't read, which meant he couldn't testify himself basically and tell his side of the story, because the judge wouldn't let somebody else read it out for him. There was other things like the Premier of Southern Australia on one of the appeals put two of the judges that were on the original trial on an appeal, so it was basically a railroading. But to this day, don't really know whether he was guilty or not guilty, which is an interesting little tidbit. But what's really fascinating about This Is an Umbrella Sunburnt Screens release, these are numbered, this is number 10, but the special features are pretty fascinating. I won't tell you all the special features because that's a little bit of a giveaway, but there's actually a seminar featuring a couple of QCs and High Court justices in Australia, politics, power, justice in the media, controversies from the Stewart case, and that's like from, I think it's from the 1990s or even just before the film was made. So this kind of changed some laws in Australia, as the QC says, not all laws, but some of the laws regarding evidence and you know, translators and stuff like that, and appeals. Yeah, so this is another perfect example of what could be Oscar bait, but I think this is actually a nice little film. Robert Carlyle's character isn't perfect, which is good. He did make mistakes in the case that perhaps a better lawyer would have thought of, you know, so he's not this perfect crusader for justice, but he didn't give up. He was kind of dogged in his pursuit of getting this guy off, not like that, and saving him from being hung. Again, it's just a really well acted little film. Again, Charles Dance is just fantastic in it. He even plays the piano in the film, and he's kind of, there's scenes with him around kind of establishment figures and his wife and parties, and of course they just kind of bend the way the newspapers are telling them, and there's a wonderful scene where he sits them all down and tells them the facts of what actually happened, or what he thinks actually happened. You know, Dance is just different class. I mean, Robert Carlyle's good in the film, but I don't know whether he's slightly miscast. Obviously at the end of the film you come up with titles, and there's a nice little film clip as well, and you do before the seminar on the extras, you do see the pictures of the real people involved and kind of what happened to them afterwards. I mean, it's not really a spoiler alert, but Robert Carlyle's character, David O'Sullivan, the lawyer, he actually died in a car accident like 7 years after the events. So obviously they can't interview him about what happened. But it basically ruined his legal career and Kerry Fox's character's legal career. They had to move away. And Colin Friels plays a Catholic priest who gets involved, and of course there's the Catholic Church angle as well. Pretty much they don't want bad publicity, as if they don't have enough bad publicity. Well, not at the time, obviously. And of course he's an Australian cinema staple, and he gives a wonderful performance as the priest trying to help out as well. It's just a really lovely little film with a wonderful Charles Dance performance. So that's just an example of two films that today would probably be Oscar bait, but are executed in a way that they don't come across as Oscar bait. Oscar bait has become really cynical, but it seems to be successful when actors are just desperate to win an Oscar, because that somehow validates them and somehow means something in their Hollyweird world of accomplishment, and obviously boosts their contract demands. But you can make films of Oscar bait type subjects but actually do it well, so it's not as cloying and sentimental and please give me awards for this. And Resurrection and Black and White are two examples of how to do it properly, I would say. But please let me know if you've seen these two films and what you think of them, or whether you think Oscar bait was always there, but obviously in the nowadays of social media and instant knowledge, it's just not as cynical as it used to be, but it's always been part of Hollywood. You can let me know in the comments. So thanks very much for watching this episode of Double Take. Hopefully join me for more episodes of Double Take. This is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, saying farewell.